All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we are going to be taking a look at 14 Habits of Highly Productive Developers by Zeno Rocha.
Yeah. So this one is really interesting because it's not just, Zeno's own thoughts. He's actually gathered input and insights from so many, like, really impressive developers,
Yeah.
people who work at, like, all the big names, Google, Amazon, Microsoft,
Yeah.
GitHub, Spotify, like the whole
I
gamut.
was going to say, like, from those big, huge companies to, like,
Yeah,
smaller startups.
exactly. Yeah, and all over the place, too.
Yeah.
San Francisco to London.
Yeah.
It's really a global perspective on what makes developers productive.
So, our mission, I guess, today is to kind of take all that knowledge that he's compiled
Yeah.
and distill it down into something actionable that our listeners can use to improve their productivity.
Exactly. And I think the focus here is really on habits,
Right.
right? Not necessarily about the specific technologies, which, those come and go.
Right. Yeah, those are always changing.
But the habits, the underlying things you do, those really make a difference in the long run.
And I think one thing that the book touches on that I really like is this idea that small actions over time, consistently applied, can lead to really big changes.
Yeah, it's that compounding effect,
Yeah.
which, we see it in finance.
Yeah,
We see it in other areas of life, but it definitely applies to personal growth as well, as you know.
for sure. For sure. And, James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits, and I think this book kind of echoes that same sentiment.
Absolutely, yeah. It's all about those consistent small wins that add up over time.
Okay, so let's dive into the first habit that Zeno talks about in the book.
Yeah.
It is look for the signals. So what does that even mean?
Well, as developers, especially today,
Yeah.
we are bombarded with just this constant stream of information. Tweets, newsletters, new frameworks every other day.
Right. It can be overwhelming.
It's totally overwhelming. And, you always get that FOMO, that fear of missing out.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Like, oh, am I missing the next big thing? But the idea behind look for the signals is to distinguish between, let's say, signal versus noise,
Yeah.
right? What is actually important for you, for your goals,
Right.
versus, all the other distractions.
I think that's such a good way to think about it. It's like trying to find a radio station.
Yeah,
You've got all this static and you're like, oh, which signal is the one I want?
exactly. Yeah. You need to tune in to the right frequency, right?
So how do you, like, what's the key to actually identifying those signals?
Well, I think a big part of it is self-awareness.
Right.
Really understanding what you're trying to achieve, what your goals are,
Right.
what technologies are relevant to you,
Right. Yeah.
and kind of, having that filter in your mind to say, okay, does this actually align with what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Or is it just, another shiny object that I'm being drawn to?
Right. Or is it just that FOMO
Yeah,
making you feel like you gotta know everything?
exactly. Yeah. And the book even talks about JOMO. Have you heard about that?
FOMO? No.
The joy of missing out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
So being content with what you know now
Okay. Yeah.
and being okay with not knowing everything
Right.
because you can't.
Yeah, it's impossible.
It's impossible.
There's too much.
Exactly. So it's kind of embracing that. But at the same time, still being open to learning new things.
Right. Yeah.
But being selective about it.
So how do you do that? Like, practically speaking.
Well, I think, some of the experts in the book offer some really good advice.
Okay.
Daniel Buckner, he works at Microsoft, and he talks about, really focusing on a few key things when he evaluates new technologies.
Okay.
First, does it meet the must-have technical requirements for his work?
Makes sense.
Second, does it facilitate collaboration?
Right.
Because we don't work in isolation anymore.
Right.
And third, does it align with long-term web standards? He actually uses this term, div-tourism, which I think is such a brilliant way to describe, just jumping from one new technology to another without really going deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You're just kind of skimming the surface, taking pictures, but you're not really immersing yourself.
I like that.
So that's one perspective.
Yeah, and so it's really about, like, making sure that it's something that you can really build on and that's going to have some staying power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have Adi Osmani from Google.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about trying out new tech, but specifically to see if it demonstrably improves his productivity or the user experience for the projects he's working on.
That makes sense.
If it does, then he'll consider, investing more time in it.
Right.
But because, we all have limited time,
Yeah.
he's very conscious about the trade-offs he makes. And he focuses on the choices that will have the biggest impact on his deeper understanding.
Right.
He even manages that initially he wasn't really sure about React,
Oh, interesting.
but, eventually he saw the value and kind of dove in.
So he was almost like a victim of FOMO in the beginning. He's like, oh, I don't know about this React thing.
Right, yeah. He was skeptical.
Yeah.
But, sometimes you have to kind of try things out
Yeah.
and see if they actually fit your needs.
Yeah. So you got to try it before you deny it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't just dismiss something outright without giving it a fair shot.
And then there's Loine Groner from Citibank.
Mm-hmm.
She has a really, I love how she breaks things down. She's
Right.
like, okay, when a new technology emerges, I ask these critical questions.
Yeah, she's very systematic about it.
What problem does it actually solve? How is it fundamentally different from the tools we already have? Can we leverage our existing skills with it?
Right.
What's the infrastructure support look like? And also, is it actually being used in production environments?
Yeah, she wants to see real-world adoption.
Not just hype.
Exactly.
So that's really good. And then we have Neto Farah from Segment. He talks about this strategy of pattern matching, new frameworks to things he's worked with in the past.
Yeah, it's like connecting the dots.
Yeah.
He saw some similarities between React and Flex, for example,
Okay.
and between Next.js and Rails. And that helped him kind of evaluate them more quickly because he could draw on his past experience.
Oh, so he's not approaching it like it's a completely foreign thing every time. He's
Right.
like, oh, this has elements of this thing I already know.
Exactly. And he brings up a really important point about transferability of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
When you're considering learning something new, like let's say Rust versus Go,
Yeah.
thinking about which one might offer more broad career benefits down the line.
Oh, that's a really good point.
So it's not just about, the technology itself,
Yeah.
but also the kind of ecosystem around it.
The long-term implications.
Yeah.
I like it. So as somebody who's trying to, make sure that they're learning the right things and not getting bogged down,
Yeah.
what would be your advice based on all this?
Well, the book actually suggests a very practical exercise, which is to create a prioritized list
Okay.
of the technologies that you're interested in learning. And maybe, categorize them into like this week, next month, next year.
Okay, so very short term to very long term.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when you start feeling that FOMO, you can go back to your list and say, okay, does this new shiny thing really deserve to jump the queue?
Yeah.
Or can I stay focused on what I've already decided is important?
I love it. So it's really about having a strategy, having a plan.
Yeah. And revisiting it regularly.
Yeah, because things change, so.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. So habit number 2 is focus on the fundamentals.
Right. And this one might seem a bit counterintuitive, especially in a field that's, constantly evolving.
Right, because it's like, oh, why do I need to know the basics when I can just jump into the, the bleeding edge?
Yeah. Why learn assembly language when you can, write Python?
Right.
Right. Exactly.
But the book shares a really interesting anecdote about the author's experience having to write HTML and CSS from scratch, using just Notepad back in university.
Oh, wow.
And even back then, there were more visual tools available,
Right.
like Dreamweavers and things like that.
Yeah.
But the act of actually having to type out all the code, manually,
Yeah.
really ingrained a much deeper understanding of what was happening under the hood.
So it wasn't just like dragging and dropping.
Right.
You had to know what was going on.
Exactly. And he says that even, a decade later, those core fundamentals really stuck with him.
Oh, that's really cool. So it's like that base, that foundation that you can build anything on.
Yeah, it's like, if you're building a house, you need a strong foundation.
Right.
Otherwise, it's going to crumble.
Exactly. Yeah. So what are some of those, what are those fundamentals?
Well, they actually draw a really good analogy to painting in the book.
You might be able to dabble in painting without knowing all about color theory.
Right.
Or anatomy or perspective.
Yeah.
But to truly become a skilled painter, those fundamental principles are absolutely essential.
So it's the same in programming. Like, you can write basic code, but to get to that next level.
Exactly, yeah. And in software development, these core concepts include things like algorithms, which are basically step-by-step instructions
Okay.
that tell a computer how to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Logic, Boolean logic and how that all works.
Yeah.
Networking, which is how different parts of an application or even different computers communicate with each other.
Right.
Accessibility, security, all these things that are kind of, behind the scenes, but they're absolutely crucial for building robust and reliable applications.
Yeah.
And also, user experience.
Right. Yeah.
How do people actually interact with your software?
So those are the fundamentals that, like, regardless of what language you're using, you kind of need to understand those things.
Yeah, these are the building blocks of any good software.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. The book actually mentions a bonus resource here,
Oh, yeah.
which is a roadmap that outlines kind of the key fundamentals for different areas.
Yeah, it's for DevOps.
Okay.
Front-end and back-end development.
Okay.
Which, for those who are just starting out, DevOps is kind of this, merging of development and IT operations.
Okay.
Front end is everything you see and interact with on a website or app.
Makes sense.
And back end is all the server-side logic and data.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a good kind of breakdown for people who are just getting started.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can find that roadmap at 14habits.com/bonus/2.
Awesome. Awesome. So what are some of the perspectives that the experts in the book offer about this, focus on fundamentals?
Well, we have Lith Andrade from Google, and she emphasizes the importance of getting a basic understanding
Right.
of the key concepts in any new language that you're learning.
Okay. Yeah.
So, looking at practical examples of how those concepts are used,
Yeah.
understanding the why behind certain design choices in the language,
Okay.
and also the importance of peer reviews in solidifying that understanding.
Oh, interesting.
So getting feedback from other developers on your code
Right.
to really make sure that you're applying those concepts correctly.
That's a great point. And then we have Fabio Costa from GoDaddy. He suggests a very efficient method
Yeah.
for learning a new language, which is to try rewriting an existing project.
Yes. It's like taking something you already know
Okay.
and just kind of translating it
Okay.
into this new language.
So you're not worried about the functionality or the design. You're just worried about the language itself.
Exact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you already understand the logic
Right.
and the functionality of the project.
Yeah.
You can really focus solely on the syntax and the core principles of the new language
That's really cool.
without having to also figure out new features or navigate unfamiliar documentation.
Right. Right. That makes sense. And then Michael Lancaster from BlackBerry.
Yeah.
He's all about the ABC principle.
Always be coding. Yeah.
Always be coding.
And he recommends dedicating at least 1 hour each day for 30 days
Okay.
to learning a new language.
Just like a focused hour of really trying to learn that new thing.
Exactly. And using tutorials that specifically focus on the fundamental concepts,
Okay.
consistently referencing the official documentation, of course,
Yeah.
and exploring open source projects.
So you can see how other people are using it.
Exactly, yeah.
So the takeaway for our listeners is that, you got to dedicate some time.
Yeah,
You got to really explore the foundational concepts.
right.
Like the book suggests this really simple exercise of creating a 2-column list.
Oh, yeah.
What you know,
Mhm.
what you need to learn.
And then find a way to bridge that gap.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. Okay. Moving on to habit number 3. Teaching equals learning.
Yeah, this one is really powerful.
So this one is really interesting to me because the author kind of shares this personal story about how he's given over 100 presentations throughout his career,
Wow.
which is a lot.
Yeah.
And he considers himself an introvert
Oh, interesting.
and still gets nervous before every presentation.
Well, that's reassuring.
Right, because it's like if this guy who's given over 100 presentations and still gets nervous can do it, then anybody can.
Exactly, yeah. It's normal to feel that way.
Yeah.
But the point here is that even people who might not seem like natural public speakers, they can still overcome those fears.
Yeah, and I think it also points to this idea that, even if you're an expert or you're really good at something, there's always that little bit of nervous energy.
Right. You want to do well.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're conveying the information effectively.
And he attributes this core principle to his father, which I think is really cool, which is, if you really want to learn something, you got to teach it.
That's such a simple but profound statement.
Yeah, yeah. So why is that? Like, why is teaching such an effective way to learn?
Well, I think when you prepare to teach something,
Yeah.
you're forced to really, really digest the information on a much deeper level.
Okay.
Right? You have to organize your thoughts, structure your explanation, anticipate questions.
You had to think about it from somebody else's perspective.
Exactly. And that process of writing it down,
Yeah.
preparing your materials, it just solidifies the information in your own mind.
Yeah.
And then when you actually deliver it to a live audience,
Yeah.
there's this level of accountability.
Yeah.
You have to be able to explain it clearly,
Right.
answer questions on the
Yeah,
fly.
just be like, I don't know. Right.
Right, yeah. So it really tests and strengthens your own understanding.
The book actually describes what it calls the 5 acts of giving a presentation. Oh, interesting.
The invitation, the reality, freaking out, the moment of truth.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then wanting to do it again.
Yeah. It's funny how that cycle works.
And I think that's such a great way to kind of normalize the experience.
Yeah, it's not just you.
It's like everyone goes through this, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's important to acknowledge that anxiety and to kind of, you know, embrace it.
Yeah.
Because it means you care.
Right. Yeah, you want to do a good job.
Exactly. So the experts in the book, they really kind of highlight this link between teaching and learning as well.
Yeah.
Fernando Tadashi from Adobe talks about how, client meetings, presentations, they demand that he has a really solid grasp of the technical details.
Right.
But they also improve his, interpersonal skills, communication skills, and also, the ability to think on his feet.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then Loyan Groner, who we mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
from Citibank, she talks about the really transformative impact that teaching has had on her learning journey. Yeah, she's a big advocate for teaching.
She does talks, books, videos, even university classes.
Wow, she does it all.
And she says that, it reveals your knowledge gaps, which is really important.
Oh, yeah.
When you think you know something, but then you try to teach it.
Yeah, you realize there are holes in your understanding.
And it's opened up all these opportunities for her, travel, meeting new people.
It's amazing how teaching can lead to all these unexpected benefits.
Yeah, for sure. And she makes a really good point, which is you don't need to be an expert to present or teach.
Right. It's more about sharing what you know and being open to learning from others.
Yeah, I like that. And then Adi Osmani from Google, he talks about how teaching forces you to self-assess.
Yeah, it's that moment of truth.
Yeah, it's like, do I actually understand this well enough to explain it to somebody else?
Right, and it pushes you to simplify complex ideas.
So you can't hide behind jargon or overly technical language.
Exactly, yeah. They have to make it understandable. And that's a skill in itself.
Yeah, for sure. And he also makes this connection between teaching and recognizing when not to use a tool.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if you can't explain its benefits clearly,
right,
maybe it's not the right solution.
Yeah, you have to be able to justify your choices.
Yeah.
And if you can't articulate it, maybe you shouldn't be using it.
I like that. And then Manuel de la Peña from Elastic,
No.
he talks about how teaching has boosted his self-confidence.
It makes sense. Standing up there and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah.
It gives you a sense of accomplishment.
And he's been doing it even before he was a professional developer.
Oh, wow. So it's been a lifelong practice.
Yeah, and he points out that the process of preparing a talk already involves a lot of learning.
Right, you have to do the research.
And then you get to share it with others.
It's like a win-win.
Yeah, for sure. So the takeaway here for our listeners is to actually look for opportunities to teach.
Yeah, get out there and share what you know.
It could be something small.
A presentation.
A presentation, a blog post.
A video tutorial.
Yeah, even just explaining something to a friend.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
The act of teaching,
right,
regardless of the format, it really solidifies your understanding.
Awesome. So these first 3 habits, I think, really build upon each other in a cool way.
Yeah, they're all interconnected.
You look for the signals to figure out what to learn. You focus on the fundamentals.
Right.
And then you teach to solidify that knowledge.
And the more you do this, the more it becomes a habit, a natural part of your learning process.
Yeah, and as you keep doing these things, that compounding effect kicks in.
Exactly.
And you see these massive changes over time.
Just like those small actions we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah, it's really cool. So, as our listeners are kind of thinking about these first 3 habits, what would you say is the most important thing for them to take away?
I think it's about finding that one habit that really resonates with them right now.
Okay.
Where they are in their learning journey.
Yeah.
And committing to a small, consistent action.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be something huge.
Just something small.
Just one small step that they can take today.
Right.
And then build on that.
Perfect. And, there are 11 other habits in this book.
Yeah, there's a lot more to explore.
So definitely go check it out if this is something that you're interested in.
And as you're reading, think about your own experiences.
Yeah.
Have you maybe already noticed these principles at play?
Yeah.
Without realizing it?
Yeah.
And how can you consciously apply them to your learning goals moving forward?
I like that. Well, this has been another great deep dive.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll catch you next time.
See ya.